You've landed inside Launch Street, the Business Innovation Podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate, differentiate, and get further faster. Since you're here, we know you're the type of person that recognizes the importance of unlocking your innovation advantage so you can compete and win. And now, your host, the person that has worked with leading companies like Disney, Procter & Gamble, Aero Electronics, the U.S. Army Research Labs, and Red Robin on upping their innovation advantage. Tamara Gontor.
Yet another great week here on Launch Street, and I've got another insightful podcast interview for you. I think this one's going to take you a little bit by surprise. Speaking of surprises, thank you to Jay Barshup for the 5-star review on iTunes and for saying that, and I quote, Tamara and her guests provide some incredibly actionable and compelling content on how leaders can effectively approach, pioneer, and foster innovation initiatives. Thanks, Jay. Super appreciate it. Speaking of compelling content, let's get to today's interview. Have you ever wondered why some things go crazy viral, like the mom in the Chewbacca mask laughing? Do you remember that? And then some things don't? Why do some ideas seem to spread like wildfire and others fall flat? How do you create communication and ideas that are downright contagious? Well, according to our guest, Tim Staples, it's less about the process and more about the emotion. I think you're going to be surprised when Tim shares the 9 rules to break through the noise. They weren't what I expected. Tim is the CEO and co-founder of the successful digital marketing company, Shareability. And in his book, Break Through the Noise, The 9 Rules to Capture Global Attention, he demonstrates his 9-step approach that has been used to craft viral hits for the Olympic Channel, Cricket Wireless, and so many more. This is so fascinating and really kind of a study in human behavior and communication. All right, here we go. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Tamara.
All right, since this is our first time meeting, what's your first memory of being innovative?
I feel like most entrepreneurs have some great story about how they had like 15 7-year-olds working for them
Right.
on a newspaper route or cutting grass or selling shoes or something. But the first thing that I remember is that I built a little contraption in my room out of shoe boxes, clothes hangers, and those tubes from wrapping paper. So that when I pulled a string, a now and later would travel about 10 feet and drop into my hand.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty cool. And they got me a piece of candy.
And have you always, or I say since then, do you find yourself, are you a builder? Like when you have an idea, do you tend to try to like make it happen or kind of see where it takes you first?
Yeah. Well, you should have seen the machine. It was a disaster. It didn't look good at all and it barely worked. But I think the lesson for me was like, if I had some candy in my room, when people came over, hey, you could have a piece of candy. But if I had this machine that dropped 10 feet and when they pulled a string, it was something that they remembered. Yeah. And people always wanted to come over and pull the string. And it was a stupid little machine, but it kind of stuck with me that just being different and giving people a unique experience was something that they would remember.
It reminds me of the opening scene in Goonies to open the door, how it's like the bowling ball goes down to the chicken coop, which then like knocks the spoon, which is like the most unnecessary thing ever, but so fun.
No, the more unnecessary, the better, I think.
That's exactly right. Well, so let's start by giving people some context. Just from your perspective and your experience, why is it so important to break through the noise?
Yeah, so I talk about it in terms of history. And if you go back 30 or 40 years, the megaphones of society, so television, movie studios, radio, really the way to get a message out on a mass level, were all owned by big corporations. So if you're an individual that wanted to be famous, or if you're a brand that wanted to get your message out, you had very few options. So it was either really difficult to become famous, you had to go through the Hollywood system, or as a brand, you had to have a lot of money. It was really expensive to go buy these national commercials. And then the internet came along and changed absolutely everything. And so now you basically have the movie studio in your pocket with a smartphone that can broadcast to the world, right? And you had this phenomenon where these kids in their parents' basement in Omaha were becoming these big YouTube stars, right, and making $1 million a year. And so the way I think about it is the good news is that now everyone has a megaphone. And the bad news is that now everyone has a megaphone,
right?
And they're shouting into it all day long, every single day. And it's so overwhelming that most people just tune all of it out.
Just very quickly, it's interesting that you say that. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I was talking about kind of the winds of change. And I was saying that the awesome part in the world that we live in today is that the barriers to entry to business of any kind are the lowest they've ever been. And which means that anyone can start a business. The bad news is the barriers are lower than they've ever been, which means that there are more people on the playing field than ever before, which is kind of what you're saying too.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. And yeah, so it means there's a lot more businesses being started. And it means if you're trying to launch a video on Instagram, there's millions of people literally yelling you and brands every single day. And so you just tune it all out. And so that's this concept of how do you break through that noise of the internet and actually get your message heard.
So do you think that, so I mean, you were kind of alluding to both of these things, but I want to break them down before we kind of go into how to break through it, which is really your area of expertise. It sounds like what you're saying is, number one, is there's just more of it, right? It's cluttered, there's so much noise out there. And the second part is, I think you were alluding to this, is we're also all shouting all the time. I mean, I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like the messages that I get, everything is so in my face all the time. Nothing is subtle. Like everyone's trying to be louder than the person before them, which is almost worse.
1,000%. No, yeah, everyone feels like that just turning up the volume is the best way to break through, right? I think it's a natural reaction when you see that there's so much happening every day and so much competition for attention. It's like, oh, I'm just going to get louder because it works. If I'm in a room and I get louder,
right, I'll just be the loudest.
But when there's 7 million people being loud at the same time, it doesn't have the same effect.
Well, I think it's one of the things I talk about around in innovation, and this is both on the personal and on the business side, is I think being louder, better, stronger, faster, like the ER kind of effect, right? Like just a little bit better or louder is just not enough. You have to, I think, to a lot of things that you talk about, you have to be different.
Amen. We talk about this concept of being shareable, right? Which is kind of what I build my whole career around. And it goes back to, that concept of building this little candy machine in my room is like, in this world where everyone's vying for your attention, how do you stand out? And how do you create something so unique and so different that people are compelled to share it? Whether that's via story or via social media or whatever that form may take, but like, how do you become the thing that they want to share?
Right. And I think that's true. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about this later, both on the kind of just individual level as well as the business level as well. So I want to dig into your book because the way you started your book kind of surprised me. I agree with it, but it surprised me. So the book is Break Through the Noise, the 9 Rules to Capture Global Attention, which it's a fantastic book. And you started the introduction with just point blank, nobody cares. And I wanted to ask you why that's important for us as innovators first to understand that before we even try to get to how to be different and some of the rules.
Yeah, I actually wanted to call the book "Nobody Cares," and I was really, I was really hardcore about it. I thought it'd be like a great flip title, and the publisher thought it was a terrible idea. And
they were like, "That means nobody buys."
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, "No, it's the exact opposite of what anyone would do, which makes it shareable, and people will love it." And he was like, "You're an idiot."
I actually really like that as the title, if it means anything. But I see what they're saying.
Yeah, it would either work really well or not at all. But I think, because of what we talked about and because there's so many people screaming all day long, I think that you have to assume the default position for people. If you have a message either personally or about your brand, is the default position is that nobody cares. And the reason that nobody cares is that everyone's selfish, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't say this in a bad way. It's just, we're all going about our day. We care about the things that are relevant to us. And we're going to tune into the things that matter and have value for our lives, right? And over the course of a day, between work and family and working out and the 50 other things we need to do, we have very limited time. So we're only going to go tune into things and give attention to things that will provide value for us in that moment. And so if your thing doesn't line up with my thing, I'm not going to care. Right. And so it's really just the mindset and the backdrop. I want to kind of drop that bomb on people to say, listen, don't assume just because you put something up on Instagram that has a cool camera and some great lighting, or you think it's funny, that anyone's going to care about it, because the default position is that they're not going to care, and you're going to be starting from zero. And I think it's just a little bit of a wake up call.
It's interesting. Well, actually, let me ask you a question before I launch into that. So you had just kind of said quickly, like, your thing has to align with their thing, right? That is kind of number one. Otherwise, you're just not going to get their attention. And I think, honestly, if you look at, I'm just going to use social media as my example for a second, because I think it's the most obvious. If you look at how I scroll through Instagram, I am flying through it until something captures my attention for some reason. I don't even, and these are people that I know and like on my personal account, not my business account. Like, I love all those people on my account, and I still am not paying attention and don't care. So, but you had said about the alignment, right? Like, what stops you is when you're in alignment. And maybe this is a kind of a longer answer here, but how do you know if what you're doing, or how do you make sure that what you're doing is in alignment with the person on the other side versus to what you just said? And I think in business, we do this all the time, whether it's personally us trying to pitch an idea or our business and our product, we're like, but it's great. So obviously they should care. But to your point, they don't. So how do you know?
Yeah, and you nailed it. I always talk about people flying through social media like a serial dater on Tinder. Like they're just swipe and swipe. Right? I mean, you're just flying through. You know immediately if you want to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different, right? Like if you're on a dating website, if you're single on a dating website, you're looking for certain things that catch your eye. If you're going through social media, you're looking for different things depending on what time of day it is and what your mood is, and if anything looks even remotely like an ad or that's selling to you, right? You spot that immediately, right? So one of the early concepts we talk about in the book, and it's really simple, but it's kind of the basis of everything in this world, is it's called focus on value. And it's this thought process that if I want to make someone share my content or be engaged with what I have to say, I have to start with them. Right. And so when people say, hey, how do I make some content that people are actually going to care about? I say, it's very simple, actually. Find a group that you want to reach, figure out what they care about, and then give it to them. Right. And obviously do that.
So simple, right? Yet so effective.
Simple. It's so simple. I mean, a lot of these concepts, they have to be translated into a digital world that can get a little complex, but the overall concepts are really straightforward, and intentionally so people can grasp them. But I think it's just human nature. It's human to human, right? The same way that if you meet somebody at a cocktail party and you just start blabbing on about yourself for the first 20 minutes, they're probably going to run for the bathroom at the first possible opportunity.
What cracks me up about that? I'm just going to throw this out there. Is nothing drives me crazier than when you're in a conversation like that with somebody you don't know. So you say to them, what do you do? What's your interest? Whatever. And they talk on, and they never say back, and what do you do? Or like they never bounce it back to you. And then to your point, like, yeah, right. And over time, you lose even more and more interest. And I think that relates to the people shouting at you on all these different channels. Is the more they shout, the worse it gets, the further away you get from them.
Yeah. And what you just described is like 98% of brands.
Right. They're just talking to you.
They all come. It's like they come up to you at a cocktail party and they say, hey, my name is, such and such brand, and you need a new watch, and I have one and it's awesome. Would you buy this watch? And let me tell you how awesome this watch is. And then they follow you around the internet shouting at you how great the watch is.
Right. That's exactly how I feel at parties and with all these businesses.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It's very funny that you say that. And to me, it's really interesting that you can really relate that back to personal interaction too, to say, hey, I just think this really, I know I keep going here, but I think it really applies to how we engage in our work as well. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times when I was particularly early in my career, when I would leave a meeting frustrating because I didn't feel heard. And I think part of that is because I wasn't doing something to really stand out with my voice and what I was trying to say. I mean, I was really just doing what everybody else was doing, although I thought what I was saying had tremendous value. And it might have, had I said it differently.
Yeah, and the reality is, even if it was the most valuable thing in the world, people, their default mechanism is going to be about them, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're telling them something that they don't instantly care about, or is not in their world purview of what they care about in the next 10 minutes, it can be super valuable, but it doesn't land.
Right.
And I think that's the concept that people don't really grasp naturally, and it just needs a reminder. Is like, you got to start with what the other person cares about. If you go into that cocktail party and your first question is, hey, I'm Tim. So tell me what you do. And then you ask a lot of follow-up questions in a very, authentic way about, why that's interesting and how it relates to maybe some things that and you have a real conversation. Now you're drawing people in and they're engaged in their world. And now they're going to say, oh, and what do you do? Right?
Right. And that kind of goes back to what you're saying about I love the what's in it for them. To me, that's a big part of anything is we don't take enough time to stop and go, well, what's in it for the person on the other side? So I want to talk to you a little bit about going viral, because I think this is something that we're all, I think as businesses too, it's like the one thing we want, right? Like we just need something to go viral. It's kind of like people who create movies to have box office hits. I never feel like it works when you start with that premise.
Yes.
But oftentimes I sit back and I see something go viral. And you had one of them in the book that I felt that way about, which I thought was like maybe funny, but I couldn't understand. It's the one with the mom and the Chewy, and she's laughing.
Yeah.
She has the mask on.
Yeah.
She's hysterical. It's not about her. But when I saw that go viral, I just thought to myself, why? Why did that go viral? So can you give us an example, something like that, and maybe even that one that we'd all know, and then just break it down for us why you think that in particular broke through the noise?
Yeah. So we talk about shareable emotions and what, the emotions of why you share, right? And it breaks down, there's actually a real science around, we're all human and we all connect to similar things. And all these emotions that we feel on a day-to-day basis are really drive our behavior, right? And specifically when it comes to the internet and social media and what we choose to watch and what we choose to share, there are a series of emotions that really drive that behavior. And there are dozens of them, frankly. And there are a lot of emotions that maybe aren't, a good fit for a brand or a personality, like anger or sadness or some pretty high intensity emotions. We've actually identified 5 emotions. We call them the 5 shareable emotions that we think drive most of the kind of positive sharing online, or that we've had the most success. When we've created, I think we have over 60 kind of, global hits now with content. And they typically hit these core emotions. And so there are things like happiness, awe, empathy, curiosity, and surprise. So those are the 5 that we kind of key in on. And so when you look at something that breaks through, like the Chewbacca mask, they typically hit, if something hits one emotion really strongly, it tends to break through the first kind of barrier. If something hits 2 emotions, it tends to go pretty big. And if something hits 3 emotions really strongly, it often becomes a global success, is what we found. And so in the case of the Chewbacca mom, the internet's a pretty negative place, right? There's, every day,
mostly, yeah.
There's a lot of anxiety and, there's a lot of things happening in the world right now that people, they just feel the negativity. So when you can give someone just a smile in their day, it's actually a really powerful thing. Or a moment of surprise or a moment of empathy and shared connection. And so you look at the Chewbacca mom where, she just literally came out of a Kohl's department store and put on a Chewbacca mask and then laughed for 3 minutes afterwards.
It was hard not to laugh with her.
Oh, it was amazing, right? You connected with her, but there was an element of just pure joy.
Yeah. Right.
And you started laughing, like you said, and then you were in on the moment, and there was a surprise, and this normal mom, she put it on, and she had this unbelievable laugh, and then she wouldn't stop laughing, and it just kept kind of surprising you as it went on, and so it just really grabbed people, and then people see that, and it kind of goes back to the everyone is selfish thing. Is the reason you share is because you want to look a certain way with your friends and family or followers. Right. It's really actually all about you. Yeah. Right. It's not about them. Right. So if you share that, Chewbacca mom mask video, you're saying, hey, I want to give you a little joy. Right. Or hey,
because I'm a joyful person. Look at me.
Yeah. Exactly. Or I'm funny, or I'm smart, or, or look at what I did. It really all comes back to that same emotion of like, hey, look at me. And so those are the things that trigger that kind of massive sharing.
So I'm going to share something that's mildly embarrassing, but I think it relates to what you're saying. So I do CrossFit, and pretty religiously. And one of the things that's always fascinated me about the community in general is that we share a ridiculous amount of memes and GIFs and whatever to each other on Instagram all day long.
all day
Yeah.
long, Tim. I'm not joking. Like
Yes.
I've already gotten 3 while we've been on this podcast from because I go at 5 a.m. I go with my group, right? Who goes at 5 a.m. And I was just thinking about that. I was like, oh, how funny we share that, because that actually shows how much of a CrossFitter we are. You know what I mean? Like we're so
100%.
into it that we're scrolling and watching and sharing, and like it's kind of funny. I hadn't really thought about it that way, because I'll share it because it's funny.
Yes.
And like I want them to share in the joke with me, but it's also because, hey, look at us, we have this inside joke because we do this thing at 5 o'clock in the
1000%.
morning. It's kind of embarrassing to admit now.
No, but it's that shared connection, right?
Yeah.
And you have an audience of people that understand exactly what you understand about one of your passions.
Right.
Right. And so when you find the next meme that will make them laugh or smile or think, you want to send that to them as soon as possible, because it reflects back on you.
Right. It's totally, and it's a little bit subconscious, right? I don't know that I've ever really thought that deeply about why I'm doing it, but to kind of ladder or loop it back to what you were saying, and will you say those 5 emotions again? Because I want to make sure the listeners really hear that, because when you said that, a light bulb went off in my head of like, oh, here we all are trying to create language, content, a way to communicate that's powerful, authoritative, louder. But what you're saying is, no, it's really just about being humans and emotion.
1,000%.
Yeah. So what were the 5 again?
Yeah. So the 5 are happiness or joy.
Yeah.
And this is really just about making someone smile in their day. The second one is awe or wonder. And these are the emotions that, it started out, the early days of the internet, where it was like people jumping out of the sky, with Red Bull, or
right.
like
It was all about extreme.
Yeah. It was extreme, right? And then it was like, how can you extreme the extreme? And it just kept getting harder.
I think that's when people started falling off cliffs at Grand Canyon and stuff, trying to take selfies.
1,000%. Yeah. Well, now it's funny. The awe that we have the most success with is actually like awe around how awesome that humans can be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when they help someone in a way that you would never expect, in like a good Samaritan way, those are the videos that actually, have the most impact right now.
Because we're all so desperate for that right now.
We're desperate for that moment of just connection and like, oh, the world is a good place. There are good people.
Yeah. Yeah. So happiness, awe, or wonder.
Happiness, awe and wonder, empathy. So empathy is all about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. And there was a great Heineken campaign. We didn't do it, but I'm actually jealous. I don't know if you saw it, where they had people of completely different belief systems or ethnicities that built a bar together over the course of the day. Did you ever see that?
No.
So basically, they would take someone that believed that homosexuality was wrong via the Bible, and they would pair them with someone that was gay, or they would take someone that had certain kind of alt-right, beliefs, and pair them with someone, from Black Lives Matter. And they would basically meet up as part of this experiment, and they would spend the day together, building a bar, right? So literally all day they met in the morning, they introduced themselves, and they literally problem solved all day to go build this bar. And then at the end of the day, after they'd been together for like 14 hours, they showed video of each of them talking about their beliefs, which was like direct opposite of the person that they've been with.
Right. And really their experience, their one-on-one experience.
100%. And so like if it had been at the beginning of the day, they would have, pointed at each other and left. And so at the end of the day, they showed those videos, and then they said, okay, hey, you have 2 choices. You can stay and have a beer together, or you can leave and basically tell the other one to go beat it. And, every one of them stayed, and they had that moment of connection and that moment of empathy. And it was really, really powerful when you saw it from that perspective.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. So empathy, wait, was there one more? 2 more.
Yeah. So empathy. And then there's 2 more. Curiosity is all about teaching people something about the world that they don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to do that. And then the last one is surprise. Like surprise is one of the biggest emotions. It's like if you think you're going to go one way and then you go completely other, especially if it's combined with joy and delight, surprise and delight. We've had some of the biggest successes with surprise videos.
So we'll make sure to put those 5 in just the words themselves in the show notes, because I think that is so valuable to understand. And just in communication overall, and how you really do break through that noise, and understanding that, it isn't just about giving the best information or showing the best attributes. It really is about connection.
1,000%.
Yeah. I'm curious in your work or even writing the book, when you kind of were crafting the 9 rules, were there any that actually surprised you or made you go, huh, I wouldn't have thought that was it?
Yeah, it's interesting because with shareability, it's been so ingrained, as we've kind of like reverse engineered how to like make this content go wide on the internet. This stuff has kind of become second nature to us. So taking a step back, I think the 2 things that surprised me were, number one, how simple the concepts are in terms of human connection.
Yeah.
And then how long the advertising world has made it in this new world without completely blowing up. Because a lot of those concepts haven't quite transferred there yet.
It's interesting that you say that, because here would be my take on it, and I'd love your perspective. My feeling is, I talk about this a lot when I speak. I think we as humans, kind of in times of change, we tend to fall back on what we've always done and what we know worked in the past. And I think the way we communicate, and particularly how businesses market themselves, is a little bit about that. So we feel really good about checking off the box by running these multi-million-dollar ads, or I don't know, getting a booth at a 5K for a small business, whatever it is. And so look, I spent $5 million and I created this great ad, or 100 million, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, it doesn't move the needle. We just happen to have particularly for a big company, we have a system and distribution behind us to support sales.
Yes.
So like we do this thing, it doesn't, I'll give you a very quick example. I'll give you the short, not this kind of keynote version. Basically, my kids and I were in an Airbnb where it had cable, and we had not had cable for like 9 years. So my kids grew up streaming everything.
Yep.
And they were trying to, my youngest was running his fingers across the TV. He was trying to swipe away the commercials. Like he didn't understand why they were there. But what was even more interesting, and I think relates to what you're saying, is a couple weeks later, I was taking them clothing shopping, and there were actually Skechers, these shoes that light up when you step on them, and super cool at the time, very trendy. And I asked him if he wanted them, and his response to me was, "No, those are the shoes that got in the way of my TV show." So here, sorry Skechers, but here you were spending millions of dollars on these ads to connect. Right. And you've missed the boat of all of the above: surprise, happiness, awe, empathy, curiosity, and channel, frankly.
Yeah.
And my son went running in the other direction. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, why do we keep doing this? And I think kind of to what you were saying.
I think the 8-year-old boy test is a great test for the advertising world right now.
I know. I mean, why do you think we keep doing what we've always done when to everything you're saying, right? To break through the noise, we've got to come up with new patterns.
Yeah, and I think the whole marketing advertising industry was built for a different era.
Yeah.
And I think people
system,
always, and it's made a lot of money, and it's made a lot of people wealthy, and it's become these big multi-billion-dollar companies that have, are publicly listed, and they make their money a certain way. And I think anytime you have that, whether it's, the newspaper industry or the music industry or the advertising industry, I think it's going to be really slow to change. And so I think there's been a lot of people in that space that it's been in their best interest for it not to change, right? And it's what they know. They have the playbook. They make people feel good, via spending the money that you talked about and checking all the boxes, like you said. But it's not working. And every boardroom we're in, when we're in with the senior level people, specifically the CEOs, they know it's not working. I mean, digital disruption, right? Like that's a big part of the business, and so. It has to change. They just don't know how to make it change. And I think the biggest mistake of that industry is they kind of treated digital like a marketing sideshow. It was like a back alley thing.
And then we'll just throw it up on digital media.
Yeah, we'll take our ad and just throw it up there. And like, this is this little thing that doesn't matter. And it's if you have kids, you understand that they spend, 90% of their time on connected devices. Right. And they swipe through everything. And the concept of advertising is absolutely foreign to them, like was with your son. Right. And so that's the world we live in. And you can either acknowledge that and evolve, or you can stay the course and see what happens.
We're watching Stranger Things, and don't worry, people listening, I will not give any away plot if you watch it. But it's steeped in the 80s, and season 3 is all 80s, which is when I grew up, which was all big advertising, big media, and all of that was very one way. And in every episode, my kids are like, why would you do it that way? What is this that you speak of? I'm like, I know, I get it. Things have changed. do you think that, so you kind of made the point that, like, we have this infrastructure, right? And that's what keeps us from breaking through the noise in a lot of ways. What is kind of if you're sitting there listening, because I can imagine this happening to a lot of us innovators out there going, yes, Tim, like I agree 100%. We got to break through. We got to think differently, but I'm in a system. So what's your advice to them in terms of like some of the smaller things maybe they can do to start the wheels going in that direction?
Yeah, I think when you're especially in a big system where things happen a certain way, I think you have to focus on the small victories.
Yeah.
And the beauty of social and digital is that you can get immediate feedback and you can get immediate measurement. And there's just so much opportunity there. I mean, I could go on because I have passion for it. But what we see, if you run an ad, right, and you run it on Facebook and Instagram or YouTube, the cost of running that ad on paid media is X, right? Let's say there's like a 6 cent CPV. What we found is that when you focus on shareable content and it actually connects with people, then they start engaging with it. It kicks that video up in the algorithm. And then when you want to run paid against it, the cost of that paid is tremendously more efficient. Mm-hmm. So instead of 6 cents, you might be paying 2 cents or 1 cent, right? Because people actually want to.
So it becomes cheaper with more success, actually.
Exponentially. And it's because, Facebook and Instagram are a business. And so they look at how difficult it is to serve an ad to an audience base. And the more it's an ad that people don't want to watch, the more difficult it is and the more they have to charge.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we've had some of our most successful campaigns that have gone viral and done 100 million views. And that's great. And it, had all these articles and drove all this website traffic. But then when we ran, paid behind it and then conversion campaigns, it would be 10 times more efficient as a paid ad. And it would convert, 4 to 5 times stronger than a traditional ad that they'd be running. And we just see that again and again. And it all has to do with the same principles. But I don't think people connect those two dots.
That's interesting. I want to bring it, we're heading that direction kind of to the personal level too. In your work and when you're working with these clients and trying to get them to think differently about so they can break through the noise, what do you think stops them as individuals from innovating and breaking through that noise?
Yeah, I think they've been trained a certain way, so they have to go against their training, right? It can be difficult. I think there's a lot of corporate power in kind of the way that it was, the things that we talked about. And I think that it's risky to step out and try to do things differently, right? I mean, there's an amount of risk if you're going against the grain. But I think there's just a general lack of understanding, like these concepts we talked about of advertising being for another era, that your son is not going to connect to an ad in the same way that someone might have 20 years ago.
What fascinates me too, though, about your point about risk is, like, my argument to that is always yes and no. So first of all, to what you said earlier, with a lot of the channels out there now, you can experiment before you dive in all the way. Yes. So you can optimize and experiment and you can see what works and what doesn't work. And you don't just go viral, right? Like you can, especially for a big company, right? You can do one little thing in one little corner of the internet, and figure it out. The other thing is, time and time again, particularly right now, it is proven that the companies that dare to stand out are also having positive bottom line impact. So I know I've talked about this before, and this is not about whether kind of anyone out there listening agrees or disagrees with Colin Kaepernick, but Nike crushed it by doing that. Crushed it. And there are a couple others that have done similar things in different kind of areas that have really, Target has been carrying LGBTQ clothing forever now, crushing it because of it, right? So we talk about risk on one hand, yet on the other, we have these two things that would kind of say otherwise, right? Yeah,
the biggest risk is doing nothing. And we see it, like we're in these boardrooms and we see these companies and they know they have a problem and they know they need to do something, but they pay lip service to actually changing the big things that they need to change. Yeah. And I don't think it's going to, listen, there's like moderate decline now from a lot of these companies. And they're like, oh, we're losing 2% a year. And they're like, how do we stop that? I think they need to be worried about going out of business.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think it accelerates. And if you look at the life cycle, it's like slightly, and then it's a tank.
It is. That's every one of these. You look at the newspaper business. Oh, yeah, the internet hasn't affected newspapers as much as we thought. It's only going down 2% a year, and all of a sudden the cliff drops.
Yeah,
like you say, and I think a lot of these brands are going to see a cliff in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and that's why I think by no means am I getting mad at you, but the conversation about risk always frustrates me because you can experiment for not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, and it's proven time and time again. And you don't have to do something as bold as align yourself with something political. It doesn't have to be like that, but being different. I mean, here's another example that I don't know if you ever follow Tough Mudder, the extreme sports.
I do. Yeah. I mean, I'm actually more familiar with Joe DeSena and the Spartan race, but that world is awesome.
Yeah. Right. So, and the Tough Mudder, I love Spartans too. The Tough Mudder I'll call out because they were really the first to do it. But more importantly, they did it in a time when everything else was individual races. So marathons, triathlons, and I'm not saying those aren't hard. I would never judge anyone for doing that. Yeah. But they went totally against the grain. And in the meantime, I think the last time I saw their valuation, it was a $4 billion business. So, and talk about going viral, like their whole business is built to share. It's incredible.
And the whole experience too, like the fact that they make it an actual experience. Like I think people are craving that in this internet age, right?
Actually, we talk a little bit about that just since we're on Tough Mudder. Like if you have ever gone or participated in their event, you know that there's bragging rights. They give you a sweatband instead of a t-shirt. There's viewing areas everywhere. People get tattoos, but it's so like their whole business, not just a marketing campaign, is built around being shareable. Can you talk a little bit about that from a business level, not just a marketing level?
Yeah, it's funny. I just saw, I hadn't been familiar with the details, but I just saw the death race with that. Are you familiar with all the pieces of that?
Only a little bit. So go by all means, explain.
Yeah, so I actually got a sneak preview to a documentary that they're working on around the death race, and wow. It's like everything you're saying, and it's taken to the ultimate extreme, and it's just built to be shareable, and it's all coming from the same place where I feel like this whole generation that's coming up now on connected devices, and they always say the internet or technology has two sides, right? And on one hand, it connects us in a way that we never thought before possible, and it brings people together, and you get to share ideas. But the flip side is that it connects us in a way that we never thought was possible, and puts us in scenarios that we're not necessarily ready for. Right. And it's creating a lot of anxiety, especially with young people. It's creating depression, that feelings that people aren't good enough because people always put their best self on social media, and you can't measure up to that. So there's a whole world that's kind of growing up, and our kids are growing up in a world where they just have a lot of tension, and it's not healthy. And so I think a lot of these brands that are actually bringing people together in the real world, I think that space is going to be really hot in the next 20 years. Is like, how do we bring real world human connection together? And do it in a way that forces people to have these really strong emotions, and those races, they put all that on steroids, right? Like the death race, like you're 4 days, you're experiencing every emotion you have in your body, right? at hyperspeed, right? And you're seeing if you can defeat it and come out the other side. I think for a $15 skull from Costco, or something, so it's just fascinating to me. Just that need for personal connection. And I think that's going to be a big part of our world for the next, generation.
Do you have I'd say that kind of two layers to this question. So I'm going to ask them together because the answer probably folds in. First of all, do you have a campaign that you've worked on that you're particularly proud of or went particularly well? And second, when you think about going through the process of creating that thing that's going to be shareable or that communication that's going to stand out and break through the noise, how do you do that?
Yeah. So, we're known for these big hits, and we've done fun stuff where we work with the Olympics to do baby Olympics. So we actually put these young kids through these Olympic events, and it was absolutely adorable, and it went really crazy. And we've done a lot of stuff with pets that have been successful. And the biggest video we've had was with Cristiano Ronaldo, and we put him in disguise in the middle of a plaza in Madrid. And anyway, so all these different things. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of is that we did a video in the education space about public education. And it's a topic that, needs a lot of attention, but absolutely nobody will step forward and actually watch, right? Like everybody says they care, but like, are they actually going to watch a video about public education and how they can make a difference? So we partnered with this young guy. His name's Prince EA, and he does spoken word. He originally was a hip hop artist and decided that he didn't want to live that life. So he started doing poetry. And he's got this unbelievable spoken word style. So we set him in a courtroom, and he basically argued via spoken word the merits or the problems with the old education system and how to fix it. And it's like a 6 or 7 minute video about public education that has in aggregate, I think it has like 400 million views and like 15 million shares. And so that's the stuff that gets me excited, is like take a topic that nobody wants to talk about and literally make it go viral
and make people actually pay attention.
Yeah. And it was that emotion of curiosity, right? Like it was like, hey, we presented in a way that made people look smart. And because it made people look smart, they wanted to share it with their friends.
I mean, you're probably very naturally good at this, but for the rest of us, how do we think about even getting to that place where we figure out that strategy? Because I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I would have sat down and been like, I have an idea. Let's get this guy to do spoken word in a courtroom,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of pieces to it, obviously, but I think it all comes down to those simple concepts of like, okay, I want to reach people that can move the needle on education. Who are those people? And what would they want? What does their day-to-day look like? What kind of content are they seeing? Oh, it's all really boring stuff that puts you to sleep, right? Like, what if we did something that was more exciting and was in a courtroom with some drama and had a really cool message that actually educated you in a way, but it was built for young people and it was cool, right? And you start to break those pieces apart. It's basically look at what's happening and almost do the exact opposite in some regards, but do it in a way where you're providing value and a unique experience.
Many years ago, I was working for an organic food brand. It was a frozen organic. And we did an audit of the grocery store and really found very simply that everything was very serious, right? It was all about like the all natural benefits and the, blah, 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 farms and blah, blah. And we went back and said, we think you should do something funny. Like, we think you should be a little bit irreverent. Everything else is serious. And they didn't do it. They thought that we were crazy. And within 2 years, they were out of business. Now, I'm not saying if they listened to us, they might still be here today, but I'm pretty sure they would have gotten a little bit of traction. But, but to your point about stepping out a little bit, I love what you're saying about, taking an audit of what everybody in that space is doing and then do the opposite. Sometimes it really is that simple.
No, it is. There's a chapter in the book called Flip the Script. And it actually is back-to-back chapters. The first one is called Ride the Wave, right? Which talks about all these things that are already happening in pop culture that you could add value to. And because it's already trending, right, you trend with it if you can tap into it the right way. It's a little dicey and it can be dangerous if you try to go on the wrong topics. But Flip the Script is exactly what you said. It's like, okay, what is everybody doing, or what is the pop culture narrative at the moment? And how do you do the exact opposite? Yeah. Are you familiar with a YouTube star called Poppy?
No.
So this is, I don't know, this may be 5 years ago. And there were all these young YouTubers like iJustine and a bunch of, super positive, bubbly personalities that were doing really well and got a lot of engagement, and they were making a lot of money. So this girl Poppy created a persona that was just the exact opposite. And her first video, I think, was just like 11 minutes of her eating cotton candy. And she had this kind of like trippy look. And and then the second video was a very long video of her just saying Poppy again and again. Oh my gosh. And again. Yeah. And it was so weird and like counter programmed that the kids just loved it. And she, amassed a huge following, but it was like the perfect example of just completely flipping the script. And there wasn't really even any value there. It was just about the fact the value was it was almost like a parody of these other accounts and going the exact opposite.
Oh my God. I love that. It's going to sound like a tangent, but it relates back to what you're saying. There's nail salons everywhere, right? On every corner. And they all look basically the same. Yeah. And I go to this one because it's local, but it was the same as everybody else. And frankly, if they couldn't fit me in, I would just go somewhere else. And then one of the nail techs actually bought it, and she made it this super funky urban graffiti It's so cool. And it's like the opposite of
Yes.
every other nail salon that's trying to be all, I don't know, hoity and toity and,
Yeah.
pristine and whatever. And I go out of my way to go there because she does it differently than everybody else. Now that may not speak to everybody, but kind of to your thing with Poppy, like at every business level, that advice that you just gave matters.
Yeah. Now you're loyal there, right? And
Yeah.
you would actually probably pay more to go there or be more inconvenienced to go there, right? Because it's part of,
I do.
It defines you in the same way, right? You're saying, I'm not going to go to just some run of the mill place where everyone's treated the same. This place treats me differently and I'm part of the experience and I look smarter or different or more fashionable.
Well, how cool am I, Tim? I go to the place with graffiti on the walls, right?
Exactly.
I think just admit it.
When you start to break it down, it sounds silly, right? But it's so true.
No, it is. It's totally true. Okay, before we have to close out, where can people go to learn more and connect?
Yeah, so you can find more about the book, Break Through the Noise, at timstaplesbook.com. And then I'm on Twitter at Mikodala, and I'm on Instagram at staples.tim.
Got it. So what is your final piece of advice for those of us trying so hard to break through the noise, even in just our everyday lives?
Yeah, I think the thing that's resonated for me is that people think that is a young person's game. And at some level, the language of the internet is being, kind of written by young people. But I found that a lot of the concepts that work are actually more wisdom based, right? So I see a lot of people that are older or in their, 40s or 50s or beyond and say, hey, digital is not for me or social is not for me. That's a young person's game. I would encourage you just the opposite. I think there's so much opportunity to bring some storytelling and frankly, some wisdom into the platform and just provide value. And I think that, you should think about it wherever you are in your career, but obviously, this is going to be a big part of the future. And so whether you're 20 and just coming up and, you're fluent on these platforms or you're 55 and you're reinventing yourself in the world, there's a huge opportunity in digital. The opportunity is still being written. Dive in, learn the platforms, learn the concepts. And you too can break through and just know it's not just for young people. I think people of a certain age have actually an advantage in this space, and so I just encourage people to embrace it.
I love it, Tim. Thank you so much for coming by Inside Launch Street. That was insightful. Now I feel like I've learned a little bit about myself and why I make some of my choices.
It's all about the emotions tomorrow. I'm glad it resonated at a certain level.
Before you go, think about how you can use those 9 rules in your own personal communication. The next time you are in a meeting presenting business results, add some humor, add some empathy, and see how that changes the responses. I know it will. Tamara, out.
Thanks for hanging with us on Inside Launch Street. If you know someone that is truly ready to unlock their innovation advantage, have them join you on Launch Street. Discover your innovation advantage. Build a team of high-performing innovators and ignite ideas and solutions that create massive impact. GOTO, launchstreet.com. Remember, innovators, if you don't take the leap, somebody else will.